Nadia's hands would not stop shaking. She pressed them flat against the kitchen counter and stared at the cutting board in front of her. Carrots. She was supposed to be cutting carrots. Dinner at 7. That was the rule. One of the many rules that had appeared so quietly in her life that she could not name the exact moment each one had arrived. Dinner at 7. Phone on the counter. Screen up. No closed doors when he was home. No visits without telling him first. No plans made without his knowledge. She had not broken any of these rules in months, and yet her hands were shaking as though she had. The front door opened at 6:47. She heard his keys hit the bowl by the entrance. She heard the particular way he paused, 2 full seconds of silence, before he moved further into the apartment. She had learned to read that pause the way other people read weather. 2 seconds of stillness meant a neutral evening. 3 seconds meant he was carrying something from work, a frustration, a perceived slight, and she would need to be careful. Tonight was 2 seconds. She breathed once, slowly, and picked up the knife. "Something smells good," Damien said, walking into the kitchen. He was a good-looking man. She remembered when that had mattered to her. Tall, with dark hair that always looked freshly cut, and a confidence that other people called charisma. Her mother had loved him on sight. Her co-workers, back when she had co-workers, had asked her more than once how she had managed to find someone like him. She had smiled at those questions. She had said she was lucky. "Chicken," she said, "and vegetables." Good. He opened the refrigerator, scanned it with the focused attention he gave everything, and pulled out a bottle of water. He drank it standing at the counter, watching her chop. She kept her movements even and deliberate. She had learned not to rush when he watched her. Rushing looked nervous. Being nervous made him ask questions, and questions could lead anywhere. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine." He set the water bottle down. "You went out." It was not a question. She had gone to the pharmacy 2 blocks away at 2 in the afternoon. She had been gone for 19 minutes. She knew this because she had checked the time when she left, and again when she returned, the way she always did now, keeping a mental account of her own movements so that she could report them accurately and without hesitation. "The pharmacy," she said. "I needed shampoo. You could have told me." "I sent you a message. Before you went," he said. "Not while you were already walking out the door." She turned back to the carrots. The knife moved steadily. She said nothing, because she had learned, over 3 years and 4 months, that responding was almost always worse than silence. Silence could be mistaken for agreement. A response, no matter how carefully worded, could be taken as argument, and argument was a door that led to a room she did not want to enter. He came to stand beside her. She felt him there without looking up. "I worry about you," he said. His voice was different now, softer, the way it got when the confrontation part was ending, and the explanation part was beginning. "You know that. I worry, and then you don't communicate, and then I spend the afternoon wondering where you are." He put his hand on her shoulder. She did not tense. She had gotten very good at not tensing. "I just want us to work," he said. "That's all I want." "I know," she said again. He kissed the top of her head and walked to the living room. She listened to the television click on. She turned the stove down a fraction and stood very still, with both hands on the counter, and her eyes fixed on the yellow surface of the cutting board, and she thought about the letter. It had arrived 3 weeks ago. A real letter, the kind with a stamp and a handwritten address, which was how she knew it had come from someone outside the system Damien maintained around her. He monitored her email, with a casual transparency he called openness. "We share everything. That's what couples do." And her phone's messages were visible to him anytime he wanted to look. But a physical letter, addressed to her maiden name at their shared P.O. box number, had slipped through because he had not thought to check that day. She had taken it from the box herself, stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light, and read it twice before folding it into the inner pocket of her coat. The letter was from her cousin Rena. They had grown up 3 streets apart. They had shared a bedroom once at their grandmother's house during a long summer, when both their parents were dealing with things children were not told about. Rena was 2 years older, and had always been the braver of the two, the one who climbed the fence into the neighbor's yard to retrieve a ball rather than ringing the bell, the one who tried things first and reported back. When Damien had come into Nadia's life, Rena had met him exactly once, and afterward pulled Nadia aside at a family gathering and said, very quietly, That man watches you the way I watch my bank account balance, like he owns it. Nadia had defended him. She had believed she was defending him. She had told Rena that she was misreading things, that Damien was protective, not controlling, that there was a difference. Rena had given her a long look and said nothing else, and then Damien had said they should leave early, and they had left early, and Nadia had not seen Rena again for 3 years. The letter said 4 things. It said, "I hope you are okay." It said, "I heard from your neighbor that you have not been around much." It said, "I am still in the same place." And it said, "I have a spare room, if you ever need one." That was all. No urgency. No dramatic declaration. 4 sentences and a phone number at the bottom. And Nadia had read it standing on the sidewalk in the November cold, and felt something move inside her chest. Not hope exactly. More like a memory of hope. The ghost of a feeling she had almost forgotten she was capable of. She had memorized the phone number and burned the letter in the kitchen sink that same afternoon, washing the ash away before Damien came home. She thought about it now, standing at the stove. She did not think about it as a plan yet. A plan was too large, too dangerous, too far from the person she had become. She thought about it the way a person in a very small room thinks about windows, not as a means of escape, just as a reminder that escape is a direction that exists. Dinner was ready at 7 exactly. She called him from the kitchen and set the plates on the table and filled 2 glasses with water and sat down across from him, and they ate. And he talked about work, a colleague who had under-delivered on something, a meeting that had run long, and she listened and nodded and made the appropriate sounds. And outside the apartment window, the city was dark and moving and enormous, and she sat inside it like a stone at the bottom of a still pond. After dinner she washed the dishes. He fell asleep on the couch watching television. She dried her hands on the dish towel and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at him, at the way his face relaxed in sleep, the way the worry lines disappeared, and he looked like someone younger, someone who had not yet become what he was, and she thought, this is the version of him that other people see. This is the version she had fallen in love with. This was real too. That was the part that made everything so complicated. She turned off the kitchen light and went to the window. From up here, 4th floor, east-facing, she could see a slice of the street below, a bar with a neon sign, a bus stop, a man walking a dog. The man stopped, looked at his phone, looked up at the sky. The dog sat patiently beside him. Then they moved on, and the street was quiet, and the neon sign said something she could not read from this angle. She stood there for a long time. She thought about who she had been when she first came to this city. 24 years old, a new job in marketing, 2 suitcases, and an idea that her life was beginning. She remembered the feeling, a specific, physical sensation in the chest, like the intake of breath before something exciting. She could not feel that feeling anymore. She could remember it clearly, the way you remember the taste of something you have not eaten in years, precisely and uselessly. She had met Damien at a work event. He had been there as a client. He had introduced himself with a directness that she had found refreshing. No games, no pretending not to be interested, just a straight look and his name, and a question about whether she wanted to get coffee. She had said yes. They had gotten coffee. 3 weeks later they had been inseparable, and 6 months later she had moved into his apartment because it was bigger and his lease was better, and because he had said he wanted to see her every morning, and she had found that romantic. She had been charmed by it. She had told her friends it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. Her friends, she counted them now, in the dark window reflection. 1 had moved cities for a job. 2 she had simply lost touch with, slowly and then completely, the contact thinning out over months until it stopped. 1 had said something at a birthday party that Damien had not liked, and Nadia had found herself, in the weeks afterward, declining that friend's invitations until the invitations stopped coming. She had told herself it was natural. You got older, your social circle narrowed. That happened to everyone. Standing at the window, she could see it for what it was. Not narrowing. Pruning. A deliberate reduction of every person in her life who might look at her the way Rena had looked at her, who might name the thing clearly, put a word on it, make it impossible for her to continue calling it something else. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She had a job 2 years ago. A real one. The marketing position she had come to the city for. She had loved it, in the uncomplicated way you love things that are just yours. The work, the the office, the particular friendships of coworkers who eat lunch together and complain about the same things. Damien had been fine with it at first. Then he had begun asking more questions about who she spent time with. In the way he asked questions, not angry, never overtly angry, just persistent, thorough, interested in every detail. He had met her coworkers at a company party, and afterward had opinions about all of them. About her manager in particular, a man named Graham. He had opinions that he stated as concern. "He looks at you a certain way," Damien had said. "I don't like it. I don't trust him around you." She had told him he was wrong. She had told him Graham was professional and kind and had been nothing but supportive. Damien had nodded carefully and said he understood, and over the following months the questions about Graham specifically had grown more detailed, more pointed, until the job itself felt contaminated by them. Going in each morning meant coming home to an interrogation, so that the job and the interrogation became one thing in her mind. And when Damien eventually suggested she look for something closer to home, something part-time, something with less travel, she had felt, underneath the grief of it, a small and shameful sense of relief. She had quit 3 months later. She told herself it was her choice. The television in the living room clicked off. She heard Damien move, heard him stand, heard his footsteps come toward the bedroom. "Come to bed," he said from the hallway. "In a minute," she said. He went. She stood at the window another few minutes. Below, the bus stop was empty now. The bar sign buzzed softly in the dark. She thought about Rena's spare room. She thought about it the way she thought about windows. Then she turned from the glass and walked quietly to the bedroom and got into bed beside the man who had taken her life apart so carefully and with such apparent love that she had not noticed until nearly all of it was gone. The alarm went off at 6:30. She was already awake. She lay still and listened to him silence it, listened to the routine sounds of morning, shower, razor, the coffee machine she had programmed the night before because he liked it ready when he came down. She lay on her side facing the wall and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was going to call Rena. Not today, not yet. But she was going to call her, and when she did, she was not going to ask for a spare room. She was going to ask for something much more difficult than that. She was going to ask for a way out that Damien could not follow. She heard him pour his coffee. She heard the front door open and close. She counted to 30, slowly, and then she sat up in the empty bed and let herself feel, for one unguarded moment, the full weight of what she was considering. It was enormous. It was terrifying. It was the first real decision she had made in 3 years and 4 months. She got up. She made the bed. She moved through the morning with her hands steady and her face composed and her mind working, turning over the problem the way she used to turn over problems at work, methodically, practically, without flinching from the hard parts. She had to disappear. Not leave. Leaving was not enough. She had seen what happened when women left men like Damien. They left and he followed. They changed their number and he appeared at their door. They moved to a new city and he told people, family, mutual contacts, anyone who would carry a message, that he was worried, that he just wanted to know she was safe, that he loved her, and needed to know she was okay. He would do it with such apparent grief and sincerity that people would help him, without realizing they were helping him find her. She knew this because he had done it before. He had mentioned it, early in their relationship, as a story about a difficult ex-girlfriend who had been unstable, who had run away from their relationship in a dramatic fashion, and how he had been frantic with worry. He had told the story as evidence of his capacity for love. She had found it touching at the time. She understood now what the story actually was. So leaving was not enough. She needed something that closed the door permanently, something that gave him no door to follow her through. She needed to cease to exist. The idea arrived not as a revelation, but as a conclusion, the kind that settles at the end of a long chain of reasoning and feels, once it arrives, almost inevitable. She stood in the kitchen drinking her coffee and considered it from all angles and could not find a way around it. She had to die. Not really, but completely enough that he would stop looking. She rinsed her cup, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet. Then she went to find a phone that was not the one Damien knew about, and she sat down at the small desk in the second bedroom, the room he called the office, the room she thought of as the room that used to be for guests before the guests stopped coming, and she wrote a phone number from memory on a scrap of paper. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up the borrowed phone and she dialed. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" said Rena's voice, cautious, unfamiliar with the number. "It's me," Nadia said. There was a silence. Then, "I've been waiting for this call for 2 years." Nadia closed her eyes. The relief that moved through her was so sudden and so strong that she had to press her free hand flat against the desktop to steady herself. "I need your help," she said, "and I need you to understand that what I'm going to ask you is serious. And strange. And possibly," she paused, "possibly the only way this ends well." "Tell me," Rena said. So Nadia told her. Outside, the city carried on as it always did, enormous and indifferent, full of people living lives that had not yet come to this particular moment, this particular crossroads. Inside the quiet second bedroom, Nadia sat at a desk that was not really hers, in an apartment that had never felt like home, and described, for the first time out loud, the shape of the cage she had been living in. And Rena listened without interrupting until she was done. And then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." The moment those words landed, something in Nadia's chest shifted. Not relief, not yet. Something earlier than relief. Something that felt almost like being handed back a piece of herself she had stopped believing still existed. She picked up the pen. She turned the scrap of paper over to the blank side. She started writing. Rena was already at the coffee shop when Nadia arrived. She had a table in the back corner, away from the windows, facing the door, the kind of table someone chooses when they want to see everything and be seen by no one. Nadia noticed this the moment she walked in. She noticed it and felt a quiet gratitude for it, for the fact that Rena understood, without being told, why the back corner mattered, why the sight line to the entrance mattered, why the window seat would have been wrong. They had not seen each other in 3 years. Nadia had expected the meeting to feel strange, charged with the particular awkwardness of long absence. It did not. Rena stood when she saw her, and Nadia walked to her, and they held each other for a moment in the way people do when words are not adequate, and neither of them tries to find any. Then they sat down. Rena looked at her with a directness that Nadia had forgotten. Most people, she realized, had stopped looking at her directly. Damien's people, people from his world, the few remaining connections she kept through him, they all looked at her with a kind of careful distance, the way you look at something that belongs to someone else. Rena looked at her the way someone looks at a person they are genuinely trying to see. "You look thin," Rena said. "I'm fine." "I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you look thin." Rena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "You can be fine and thin at the same time. I'm not making a judgment, I'm just looking at you." Nadia almost smiled. "You haven't changed. Someone has to stay the same." Rena's voice was mild, but her eyes were steady and serious. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't manage it. Don't make it easier to hear. Just tell me." Nadia told her. She had told it to herself many times in the privacy of her own mind, but telling it to another person was different. Told to herself, she could soften it, could fold the difficult parts into the context that surrounded them, could always find the parallel thread that made Damien comprehensible, even reasonable. Telling it to Rena, she heard it differently. She heard it in the way Rena was hearing it, as a sequence of events, each one unremarkable, but in sequence adding up to something that had a name. She could see that name forming on Rena's face as she spoke, and she pressed on through it without pausing, because she knew that if she stopped, she might talk herself out of the parts that sounded worst. When she finished, the coffee shop was quiet around them. Someone at the counter ordered something. Music played from a small speaker, something with a piano. Ordinary things. The world continued its ordinary operations, while Nadia sat in a back corner and felt the specific vertigo of having put language to a thing she had been living inside for 3 years. "Okay," Rena said. "Just that." Nadia had expected more. Questions perhaps, or some form of the reaction she had always dreaded. The pity, or worse, the well-meaning advice to simply leave, to go to the police, to call a shelter. All the reasonable suggestions that overlooked the fact that reasonable options had already been considered and found insufficient. "Okay," Rena said again, more quietly, "so we're not doing the obvious things, because the obvious things don't work with him." "They won't," Nadia said. I've thought about it. I've thought about all of it. He's too, she paused, finding the word. He's too patient. He'll wait. He'll appear reasonable to everyone around him and he'll wait, and eventually he'll find me. Or he'll make it impossible for me to live. Either way. Either way, you're still in it, Rena said. Yes. Rena was quiet for a moment. Nadia watched her cousin's face move through something internal, a calculation or a resolution. She could not tell which. Rena had always been like this. She processed quickly and quietly, and by the time she spoke, she had already decided. It was a quality that had made her difficult in childhood, and formidable as an adult. Then we do something different, Rena said. Something that ends it completely. That's what I've been thinking about, Nadia said. Tell me what you have. Nadia leaned forward. She had been thinking about this for 4 weeks, since she had first called Rena. She had not been idle in those weeks. She had read. She had researched. She had thought through the logistics with the same careful attention to detail that she used to bring to her work, the part of herself that Damien had put away, but had not erased. A car accident, she said. On a road he doesn't know I use, far enough from the city that the connection to my daily life is thin. I go off the road, into water, ideally. Something that makes recovery difficult. The car is mine, registered to me. There's evidence I was driving, but no body. Rena's expression did not change. This too was something Nadia was grateful for. The absence of shock, or the performance of shock. Rena processed this as she processed everything, straight on. No body makes it a presumptive death, Rena said. Not confirmed. He could still argue you're alive. Not if the documentation supports it, Nadia said. I've been reading about this. There are people who can produce paperwork. Not legitimate, obviously, but convincing. A coroner's report based on physical evidence at the scene. Dental records that support the identification. There are people who do this. I know one, Rena said. Nadia looked at her. Don't look at me like that, Rena said. I grew up in the same family you did. I know people from a world you decided not to know. I never judged you for that. I'm telling you now because it's useful. She set her cup down. His name doesn't matter. What matters is that he's done this before for people who needed it, and the work holds. It has to hold. His reputation depends on it. Nadia let out a breath she had been holding since she sat down. The next hour was practical. Nadia had expected it to feel strange, 2 women in a coffee shop planning a disappearance, but it felt more like the work sessions she remembered from her marketing days, the focused, problem-centered conversations, where you put the goal on the table and worked backward from it. The goal was clean. She had to cease to exist, completely enough that Damien's search hit a wall it could not pass through. They talked through the location. Rena knew of a rural road 40 minutes north, a stretch where the road curved above a ravine, where the guardrail had been damaged in a storm 2 years earlier, and never properly repaired. It was the kind of stretch that appeared in local news twice a year when someone took the corner badly. It was believable. It was isolated enough that arrival of first responders would take time. The car goes in, Rena said, sketching it on a napkin. Not a map, just a diagram of the logic. The scene is set the night before. You are not in the car. Where am I? 3 miles up the road. I drive you there at 2 in the morning. We take my car. No cameras on that stretch. I drop you. Continue north. You wait. The car goes in at 2:15, remotely or mechanically. I'm working on the method. By 2:30 you're in my car, heading north, and the scene is live. What evidence links me to the car? Personal items, your coat, your work bag. Your phone, which we disable before it goes in, but not before it pings the tower on that stretch, so the location data is consistent. Rena looked at her steadily. Nadia, this only works if every single detail holds. One inconsistency and he finds it. You know that. I know. And you can't contact anyone. After you disappear, there is no one from your current life. Not old friends, not your mother. My mother and I barely speak, Nadia said. The truth of this sat between them. Her mother had been one of the first things to thin out. Not because Damien had done anything obvious, but because her mother made her feel, in that specific way mothers could, that she was not entirely okay, and the awareness of not being entirely okay was not something she could afford when she was working so hard to believe that she was. You still can't contact her. Not for a year, at minimum. I know. You become someone else, Rena said. New name, new city, new everything. I have a contact for documentation, separate from the first contact. Identity is his specialty. You'll have a name, a history, a set of documents that are clean. How much? Nadia asked. Rena named a number. Nadia had expected this too. She had been quietly setting money aside for 8 months. Cash from the grocery budget, amount small enough not to flag, accumulating in a zippered pocket in a coat Damien had never shown interest in. It was not enough. It was, however, a foundation. The rest, Rena said, I can lend you. I won't take your money, Rena. You'll pay it back when you can, Rena said simply. Or you won't. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about money here. We're talking about your life. She picked up her coffee and found it cold and set it back down. These are the same thing right now, so let's not pretend there's a choice. Nadia looked at the table. A small crack ran along the edge of the laminate surface, she noticed. The way you notice small things when the large ones are too much to hold. There's one more thing, Rena said. Nadia looked up. You have to be gone before the search starts, not hours after. Minutes. The timing has to be exact, because once the emergency call goes in, the clock starts. And the first thing Damien will do, Rena paused, when he gets the call, will he believe it? Nadia considered this carefully. This was the question that had kept her up longest in the past 4 weeks. Would Damien believe she was dead? He knew her well, possibly better than anyone, in the particular way that control comes with a meticulous knowledge of its subject. He had catalogued her. He had learned the patterns of her behavior, the texture of her moods, the specific tells that she did not know she had until he pointed them out. If she had been planning this, had he sensed it? He'll believe it, she said, and she said it with more confidence than she felt, because he will have no reason to believe she would ever try. Rena looked at her. That's what he thinks, Nadia said. That's what he's sure of, that I wouldn't, that I don't have it in me. She said this without bitterness, or tried to. He's been very careful to make sure I believe that about myself too. But you do have it in you, Rena said. I'm going to find out, Nadia said. Outside the coffee shop window, the afternoon continued. People walked past on the pavement, coats up against the cold, eyes on their phones or on the middle distance, each of them inside their own particular life, none of them knowing that in a back corner table, 2 women had just drawn a map to the edge of the world. In 3 weeks, Nadia would follow it. They stayed another 40 minutes, working through details, testing each piece of the plan against the questions Damien would ask. Because he would ask them. She was certain of that. He would approach the news of her death the way he approached everything, with patience, with thoroughness, with a focus that never relaxed until he was satisfied that he understood. She needed each piece of the story to be solid enough to survive his attention. By the time Nadia stood to leave, she had 3 pages of notes in a shorthand she had invented on the spot, on the back of the coffee shop's paper menu. She would destroy them tonight. She had already decided where, the same place she had burned Rena's letter, in the kitchen sink, watching the paper blacken at the edges and curl. She hugged Rena at the door. 3 weeks, Rena said quietly. 3 weeks, Nadia said. She walked to her car alone. The afternoon light was low and gray, the way it gets in November, when the sun has no conviction. She sat behind the wheel and looked at the street ahead of her and breathed, in, out, deliberately, the way she had learned to breathe in the difficult years. She drove home. She set the table for dinner. She waited. At 7 o'clock exactly, she heard Damien's key in the lock. She stood at the stove with her back to the door, and her face composed, and her mind running its quiet and hidden calculations, and she thought, 21 days. 21 days, and then Nadia would be gone. What would come after that, she did not yet know. But she was beginning, for the first time in years, to believe that there would be something. The night they had chosen was cold and overcast, which was what they had wanted. Clouds meant no moon. No moon meant the kind of dark that a rural road becomes when its only light is whatever the headlights of passing cars leave behind. A dark that lasts. Rena had checked the forecast 4 times in the preceding week, and each time it had returned the same answer. Overcast, no precipitation, wind from the northwest. Good conditions, as good as could be arranged for a thing that could not really be arranged. Nadia had spent the preceding 2 weeks doing nothing that could be remarked upon. She had been, in those final days, the most consistent version of the self she had been performing for 3 years. Dinner at 7, phone on the counter, no unexpected absences. She had been attentive and quiet and present in all the ways that Damien had come to expect, and she had done this with a calmness that she could not entirely account for. She had expected the waiting to feel unbearable. Instead, it had felt, strangely, like weight leaving. Each ordinary day that passed was one day less between her and the edge of the road, and the awareness of the edge, the knowledge that it existed, that she had chosen to walk toward it, made the ordinary days bearable in a way they had not been in years. She had memorized every detail of the plan, the way she used to memorize client presentations, running through it at night in the dark with her eyes open, seeing it as a sequence of movements and times and contingencies. She had a bag she had packed in pieces, items collected over months, and hidden in a box in the back of a storage unit she had rented, under a name that was not hers, paid in cash, through a proxy she had asked Rena to arrange. In the bag, a set of documents Rena's contact had produced, clean and consistent, and bearing a name she had chosen herself, Mara Ellison. Basic clothing, nothing recognizable. Cash, a prepaid phone, a slip of paper with an address in a town she had never been to, 300 miles north. The night before, she had sat on the edge of the bed while Damien slept and looked at the room with the specific attention of someone who will not see a thing again. Not the room she would miss, she realized. She had stopped thinking of this apartment as home a long time ago. What she was looking at was the evidence, the traces of the person she had been when she arrived here, now thoroughly buried under the layers of who Damien had needed her to be. The books on the shelf, half of them his choices. The photographs on the dresser, none of them from before. The absence of almost everything she had brought in and gradually been separated from, piece by piece, through a process so slow it had barely registered as loss at the time. She was not sorry to leave the room. She was, she realized, not sorry about most of it. She was sorry for the years. She was sorry for the friends she had let slip. She was sorry for her cousin, who had waited 2 years for a phone call and had not complained. She was sorry for the version of herself who had stood on a sidewalk reading a letter and felt, as the only available response, a ghost of an emotion she could barely access. She was not sorry for what she was about to do. She had left the apartment at 1:45 in the morning. She had left with nothing. Her coat, the one Damien knew, the dark one she wore in November, was hanging by the door. She walked past it. She was wearing an older jacket she had retrieved from the storage unit that afternoon, on her last legitimate trip out. During a 2-hour window, when Damien was at a work dinner she had encouraged him to attend. Under the jacket she carried nothing that belonged to Nadia, nothing that could be traced, worn, recognized, or questioned. She had placed her phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, as per the rule. She had turned the kettle off. She had left the living room light on because she had noticed, over the years, that a lit window was something he checked. An unlit apartment, when he expected her to be inside, made him call immediately, and she needed him not to call until morning. She had left through the building's service exit, which she had scouted over the preceding week, during a period of deliberate routinizing, taking slightly different paths through the building at odd hours, until she knew which cameras covered which corridors, and which exit was not in view of the street-facing lens at the front. Rena was waiting 2 blocks away, in a car Nadia had never been inside. She had gotten in without speaking. Rena had driven. They were on the highway by 2 o'clock. The city fell away behind them, lights thinning, the specific orange of urban night giving way to the deeper dark of the roads beyond it. Nadia watched the transition through the passenger window and felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not even known was tight until it began to release. They did not talk much. They had said everything there was to say. Rena drove at exactly the speed limit, hands at a precise position on the wheel, with the focused quiet of someone who had decided what needed to be done and was doing it. At 2:13, they reached the stretch of road. Nadia had not seen it before. She had only known it from Rena's description, from the satellite view she had studied on a borrowed laptop, from the mental map she had built over the weeks of planning. Seeing it in person was something else. The guardrail was exactly as Rena had described, damaged, leaning at a wrong angle. The post on the right side pulled away from the surface of the barrier. Below the bend in the road was the ravine, not deep enough to be dramatic, but dark and rough, and the kind of terrain that made recovery of anything difficult. That had been the requirement. "This is your stop," Rena said. Nadia got out. The cold hit her immediately. The overcast sky was solid above her, no stars, no variation, a uniform gray-black that absorbed sound as well as light. The road was silent in both directions. She could hear the wind in the dry grass on the slope below and nothing else. Rena came around the car briefly. She pressed something into Nadia's hand, a flashlight, small and flat, the kind you can hold between two fingers. Then she held Nadia's face between her palms and looked at her. 3 miles up on the right, she said. There's a gravel turnout, orange reflector on the post. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I know, Nadia said. You've got this, Rena said. It was not a question, and not a pep talk. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered in the same tone Rena used for everything, as though the outcome were already settled and she was merely confirming it. She got back in the car and drove. Nadia stood on the shoulder and watched the taillights move away down the road until they disappeared around the curve. Then she turned and started walking. The 3 miles took her 52 minutes. She had practiced this, the pace, the terrain, the idea of it, but practice was not the same as the real thing. The real thing was dark, in a way that felt substantial, the flashlight carving a small and uncertain path ahead of her. The real thing was cold, that settled into her shoulders despite the jacket. The real thing was the sound of her own footsteps on the gravel shoulder, and the awareness that somewhere behind her, in a city 30 miles south, a man was sleeping in a lit apartment beside a phone on a kitchen counter. She did not look back. At 2:22, she heard it. At this distance, and muffled by the dark and the wind, it was quieter than she had expected. Not a crash exactly, more like a sustained impact, a sound with weight rather than sharpness, and then a brief secondary sound of something settling into stillness. Then the night was quiet again. She stopped walking. She stood on the gravel shoulder and breathed. The car, her name on the registration, her coat in the back seat and her work bag in the footwell, and her phone tucked into the door pocket with the battery dying on a signal that matched the tower for this location, was in the ravine. The scene was live, the sequence had begun. Somewhere in the algorithm of a city, in the routing of an early morning call to emergency services, in the response dispatch, in the accumulation of the official record, Nadia was dying. She did not feel the way she had expected to feel. She felt very calm, and very awake, and, underneath both of those things, a sensation she had trouble naming, something like grief, but not for Damien, and not for the life she was leaving, for the version of herself who had needed to do this, for the 24-year-old woman with 2 suitcases and a feeling of beginning who had not known what she was walking into. She let herself feel it for exactly 1 minute. She had given herself that. Then she turned and kept walking. The orange reflector appeared on the right at 3:13 in the morning. She saw Rena's car before she reached the turnout, the shape of it in the dark, the engine idling softly. She got in. The car was warm. Rena looked at her once, checked the road behind them, and pulled out. "Anyone on the road?" she asked. "No one," Nadia said. "Good." Rena's eyes were on the mirror. "We drive straight through. No stops until we're 2 states out." "Okay." They drove in silence for a long time. The road north was empty at this hour, the dark consistent, the fields on either side of the highway flat and still. Nadia sat with her hands in her lap and her head against the headrest and watched the broken center line come at the windshield and pass and come again, hypnotic in its repetition, each segment identical to the one before. At 3:47, her phone, the old phone, Damien's phone, the one in the ravine, sent its last ping. She knew the number. She had timed it. The battery would die within the hour, and after that the phone would be water damaged anyway, and the signal record would show exactly what it needed to show. Nadia's phone on the road north, near the ravine, at the time consistent with a late-night drive she might have taken for any reason. At 4:15, Rena's phone buzzed. She did not look at it. At 4:22, it buzzed again. At 4:30, it buzzed a third time, and this time Rena reached over carefully and turned the screen toward Nadia. An alert, routed through a system Rena's contact maintained, a monitor on local emergency frequencies and news feeds for exactly this kind of event. It read, "Vehicle recovery, rural route north, ravine impact, identity of driver unconfirmed." And below that, 4 minutes later, a second alert. It read, Male subject arrived on scene before emergency services. Identified as romantic partner of registered owner. Agitated. Requesting information. Nadia read this and felt her stomach tighten. He got there before the ambulance, she said. Yes, Rena said. He was already looking. Yes, Rena said again, and her voice was careful and even. Which is what we expected. Which is what we expected, Nadia repeated. She turned the phone face down in her lap. Outside, the dark was beginning to change at its edges, the particular shift that happens in the last hour before dawn, when the black starts separating into textures, when you can begin to make out the shape of a tree line against a slightly less dark sky. Damien was at the ravine. He had gotten there before the emergency services. He was not grieving on a phone in a dark apartment. He was there, on the road, demanding information that the first responders could not yet give him. She had known this might happen. She had told Rena he would not wait. He would not sit with uncertainty. The moment the notification reached him, however it reached him, a call from a number she had once memorized, in case of emergency, or an alert of some kind, she had not been able to predict the exact mechanism. He would move. He would go to the source. He would want to see. What he would see was a ravine, and a damaged guardrail, and the beginning of a recovery operation, and he would stand on that road and look, and he would not find her. He would not find a body. He would find evidence, and the absence of certainty, and the beginning of a very long wait. She knew what that wait would do to him. She knew it better than almost anything. She hoped it was enough. She pressed her head back against the seat and closed her eyes as the sky continued to lighten ahead of them, and she thought, I am Mara Ellison. I was born in the city of Hartford. I am 28 years old. I have a set of documents in a bag. I am driving north with my cousin on a cold morning, and I am going to a town I have never been to, and I am going to build a life there, piece by piece, and I am going to do it quietly, and without drawing attention, and I am going to be careful and patient, and I am going to survive this. She repeated it 3 times. Then the sky finished its turning, and the first gray light of the new day came through the windshield, and Mara Ellison opened her eyes and looked at the road ahead. The marina town was called Greywater Point, and it smelled like salt and old wood and diesel, in the particular combination that means water and boats and working people who do not have time to notice the smell because they are already working. Mara had arrived on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of November, on a bus that stopped at the gas station on the main road before continuing north to somewhere else. She had gotten off with 1 bag and stood on the pavement outside the gas station and looked at the town and let the cold air move through her, and she had felt, for the first time since the ravine, that she was somewhere no one knew her name. The room she had arranged through Rena's network was above a hardware store on the east side of town, a landlord named Ellis who asked no questions beyond whether she could pay the first month up front, which she could. The room was small and clean, and had a window that looked out over the back alley, and a heater that worked as long as you didn't set it above 62. She set it at 62, and considered this more than adequate. She had a job by the end of her first week. The marina hired her for cash, off the books, as a general hand. The kind of work that involved no specialized knowledge, but a willingness to be cold and useful, to move things from one place to another, to clean surfaces that would need cleaning again in a day, to be quiet and reliable, and not the sort of person who asked about overtime. She had presented herself to the marina manager, a compact woman named Bev who communicated primarily through nods and minimal speech, as someone who had moved for personal reasons and needed work. Bev had nodded at this and said she could start Thursday, and that had been that. 3 months passed in this way. She was careful in the way a person is careful when they know, specifically and practically, what lack of carefulness costs. She paid for everything in cash. She did not open accounts. She did not apply for anything that required her prior identity. She used the name Mara Ellison, with the consistency of someone who had worn it for years, and over the weeks it stopped feeling like a costume, and started feeling like a skin, which she had been told would happen, and had not entirely believed. She thought about Damien. She could not help it. She thought about him the way you think about a storm you have outrun, not wanting to look back, but unable to stop checking the horizon. She thought about him standing on the road above the ravine in the dark, and the image had a quality she could not classify, not satisfying, not frightening, somewhere between the two. She had known this man for 3 years and 4 months. She had memorized him the way he had memorized her, from the inside, from the accumulated evidence of years of close proximity. She knew what he would do. She was almost certain she knew what he would do. He would grieve publicly. He would speak with police. He would be the concerned and devastated partner in every interaction with authorities, and he would do this genuinely, in the sense that his emotions were real, even when their expressions were performances. He would attend a service if her family arranged one. She had told Rena to manage this, to tell their relatives as little as possible, to let the narrative be simple. He would be the grieving man, and people would pity him and help him, and he would use that help to look. But she had given him a wall to look at, not a trail, a wall. This was what she told herself on the evenings when the town was quiet and the water was dark and the lamp in her room made a yellow circle of light that was exactly the right size for one person. She was fine. She was safe. He could not find what was not there. The thing she had not predicted was the hollowness. She had expected freedom to feel like something, like relief, or air, or the particular brightness of a room after the lights are turned back on. It did not feel like those things. It felt, for the first several weeks, like nothing at all. And then, as the weeks settled into a routine, it began to feel like a shape she did not know how to fill. She had spent 3 years becoming smaller, quieter, more still. She had reduced herself, first under pressure and later out of habit, until the occupied space of her inner life was very compact and very defended. Being free of the pressure did not immediately make her larger. She was a compressed thing, in a room that was suddenly big, and she did not know yet how to expand. She came to understand this slowly, the way you understand weather, by watching what it does to the world around you and working backward to its cause. She understood it on the mornings when she woke at 4:45, heart already running, before she remembered where she was and why it was safe. She understood it on the evenings when someone in the marina office raised their voice about a scheduling problem, and her body responded before her mind caught up. A full, physical readiness, the kind that does not distinguish between actual threats and raised voices from people who have nothing to do with her. She understood it when she stood at the marina's outer dock in the late afternoon and watched a ferry go out toward the open water, and felt, without apparent cause, an enormous tiredness, not the tiredness of work, but the tiredness of years. She was safe. She knew she was safe. Her body was still checking. This, she would learn, was how it went. She watched the alerts. She had a system, a laptop, an email address with no connection to her real identity, a set of keyword searches that Rena maintained and routed to her through a chain of indirection that made the traffic invisible. News about Damien's search for her would come through this channel, if it came. Updates on the legal status of her presumed death. Anything that suggested the wall had a crack in it. For 3 months, there was nothing. The wall held. She read about herself once, in a local newspaper from the city that Rena had forwarded. A brief item, 3 paragraphs, about the ongoing search efforts following the accident. Damien was quoted. He had said that he could not accept the outcome, that he was still hopeful, that no proper closure had been reached without a confirmed finding. The reporter had framed this as love. Nadia had read it as what it was. But it was 3 months old by the time she read it, and the more recent alerts contained nothing about active searching. Maybe he had accepted it. Maybe the wall had held completely, and he had turned his meticulous attention to something else, to the grief, or to the next version of his life, or to some other subject of focus. She wanted to believe this. She was not sure she did. On the dock one afternoon in early February, she met the man named Kane. She had seen him before. He appeared at the marina occasionally, spoke briefly with Bev, and left. He dressed like anyone who worked near water, which was part of how she had not paid close attention. A canvas work jacket, boots that had seen weather, the kind of bearing that suggested physical work was not a novelty. He was not remarkable in any way that was immediately obvious. What she had noticed, in passing, was that Bev spoke to him differently than she spoke to everyone else, with a particular quiet deference that was very unlike Bev's normal mode. On this afternoon, they happened to be at the same point on the outer dock. She was moving mooring supplies from a storage cart to a pier locker. He was looking at the water, just standing there, watching the surface of the harbor, doing nothing in particular. She moved past him twice, and the second time he stepped slightly aside without being asked, which she noticed, because it was the kind of small courtesy that people do without thinking, and which, she had learned, said something accurate about them. "Sorry," she said, though he had already moved. "No need," he said. He had a voice that was unhurried without being slow. She moved on with the supplies. When she came back for the third load, he was still there. "You're new," he said. It was not a question, but it was not aggressive either. It was the way you state a fact in a small town, which is not the same as demanding an explanation for it. "A few months," she said. He nodded. He did not ask why she had come, or where she had come from, or anything that would have required her to produce a version of the story she had been maintaining. He just nodded and looked at the water again, and she went on with the work, and when she next looked back he was gone. She thought about this on the walk home. She thought about the absence of a question, where most people put a question. She thought about the step to the side before she had needed to ask. She thought, in the shorthand she had developed over the preceding months for assessing people quickly and accurately, that he was either a very private person or a very observant one, and she did not yet know which. Either way, she went home that evening and ate her dinner and sat at her desk and did not check the alerts that night, and felt, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, the particular loneliness of a life that has been deliberately emptied of anyone who might notice her in return. It was a loneliness she had chosen. She knew that. She had also known, when she chose it, that knowing it was chosen would not make it feel any different. In the drawer of her desk, under the prepaid phone and the stack of cash, and the spare key for the hardware store entrance, there was a folded photograph. She had not brought it from the apartment. She had brought nothing from the apartment. Rena had taken it and sent it by ordinary mail to her landlord's address. No return information, just a photograph in an envelope. It was a picture from when Nadia and Rena were children, the summer at their grandmother's house, the long summer of things children were not told about. They were sitting on the back step. Rena was looking at the camera. Nadia was looking at something to the left of it, something beyond the frame. She did not know what she had been looking at. She looked at the photograph now and thought that she was still doing it, looking at something just outside the frame of what was visible, some shape of the future she could not quite make out. She was safe, and she was free, and she was building something piece by piece, in a town that smelled like salt and old wood, and she did not yet know what it would be when she was finished. She thought it was probably a self. She had heard that was something you could rebuild. She was going to find out. The man who was not what he appeared was named Kane Hartley, and Mara had worked alongside him for 6 weeks before she realized she was looking forward to the days he appeared at the marina. This was information she did not process comfortably. It arrived sideways, the way the important things did. She was on the dock in the early morning, pulling equipment checks, and she registered, somewhere peripheral, a quiet kind of anticipation that was not about the equipment. She identified it, and set it aside and went on with the checks. Then she identified it again at noon and set it aside again. By afternoon she had accepted that it was there, and that she was not going to be able to put it somewhere she could ignore it, and she allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgement of this, and then got on with the business of not doing anything about it. He came to the dock most Tuesdays and Thursdays. He spoke to Bev, reviewed something on a tablet he always carried, and then spent an hour or so simply being present near the water, in a way that she had stopped finding strange and started finding. She was not going to say reassuring, but it was something in that direction. He did not perform his presence. He did not announce himself or explain himself, or require anything of anyone around him. He was simply there, in the particular way of someone who is used to occupying space, without apologizing for it. He had learned her name from Bev, she assumed. He used it exactly once, her first week after their initial exchange, and then did not use it again, in the way some people don't, the way people who are a little private respect the privacy of others, by not reaching for familiarity faster than it is offered. She had learned very little about him from direct conversation. She had learned more from watching the way the world responded to him, which was its own kind of information. The other workers at the marina gave him a wide berth without any evident unfriendliness, the specific deference of people who know who someone is without having been told explicitly. When he spoke to Bev, Bev listened with both hands still, which was unusual. When he walked the length of the dock, people moved slightly, not out of fear but out of something more like instinct, the same way you step to the side for someone who takes up space, with a confidence that is not aggression. She had asked one of the other dock workers, a quiet man named Pete, who had worked at the marina for 12 years and knew everything worth knowing about it, who exactly Kane Hartley was. Pete had looked at her with the particular expression of someone deciding how much to say. "Old family," Pete had said. "Goes back here about 4 generations. Has property on the north side." "What kind of property?" she had asked. "The kind you don't see the edge of," Pete had said, and had gone back to his work. She had filed this information in the category she maintained for things she did not yet know what to do with, and had continued with her own work, and had told herself that it did not matter who he was, what kind of property he had, or why Bev stood still when he spoke. The problem was that she kept thinking about him. Not dramatically, not in the way she might have, once, when she was 24, and in possession of a self that moved toward things freely. It was quieter than that. More like a sustained awareness, the way you are aware of a window in a room, even when you are not looking at it. He was in her peripheral attention. She found this inconvenient. On a Thursday in the 3rd week of February, he brought coffee. He said nothing about it. He simply appeared at the outer dock where she was working, with 2 cups from the diner 2 streets over, and set one on the railing near her. Then he sat on the edge of the dock with the other cup and looked at the harbor. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. "You didn't ask how I take it," she said. "Black," he said. "I guessed." She picked up the cup. She was right that it was black. She drank it, and said nothing about the correctness of the guess, because she was not sure what she would have said, and she had learned, over the past months, that silence was not always avoidance. Sometimes it was just honest. They sat there for 20 minutes. Occasionally he said something about the water, a weather change coming from the northwest, a boat he recognized on its way out. She responded when she had something to respond with. He did not fill the silences, which was the thing she noticed most. She had been in the company of people who could not tolerate silences for years, who needed to occupy every gap with sound, with explanations, with the constant maintenance of conversation as a form of control. Kane Hartley sat with silence, the way he sat with everything else, as though it was not a problem. The days were getting longer, which she had not noticed until she noticed it. By 4 in the afternoon there was still light on the water, a flat, pale light that turned the harbor surface into something almost luminous. She stood on the dock one evening watching this and thought, very simply, that it was beautiful. Then she thought that she was thinking this. Then she thought that she had not thought about anything being beautiful in a long time. She went home and sat at her desk, and opened the laptop, and ran the alerts. There was one new entry. It was not a news article. It was something Rena's system had flagged from a semi-public forum, used by people who worked in investigation and recovery. The kind of people who were hired for searches, missing persons cases, that sort of work. Someone had posted a query. They were looking for background on a presumed dead woman from a city in the south, 30 days on the road north, rural location, vehicle in water, no body, possible survival scenario being assessed. She read it twice. The query did not use her name. It used a case number and a description. Female, late 20s, dark hair, medium height, that fit her well enough to be specific, and vaguely enough to fit several hundred other women. There was no photograph attached. She scrolled through the replies. One person had noted that survival in water at that temperature at that time of year was extremely unlikely. Another had said that the documentation from the event was clean, no apparent inconsistencies. A third had simply said, probably a dead end. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the room and listened to the building settle around her, and told herself that this was expected, that she had expected it, that someone would hire someone to look at some point, and looking was not finding, and finding was not. She was on her feet before she knew she was standing. She crossed to the window and looked at the alley below, which was empty, and then at the street beyond the alley, which was also empty. Just the gas station on the corner, and its yellow light, and a cat on the pavement, and nothing that was looking for her. She went back to the desk and sat down. 3 miles from here, on a Tuesday, a man had brought her coffee, without asking how she took it. This was not relevant. She knew it was not relevant. She was not going to allow it to be relevant. She was going to be very quiet and very careful, and she was going to wait for the query to find its dead end, and then she was going to continue doing exactly what she had been doing, building, piece by piece, the small life of a woman who did not exist until 4 months ago, and who was learning, slowly, and with some difficulty, that existing was something you had to choose to do, not something that simply happened to you while you waited. She turned the lamp off and lay down on the narrow bed with her clothes on, and stared at the ceiling, and let the quiet of the harbor town do its work around her, which it did, as it always did, with an indifference that she had come to find comforting. She was safe. She was going to stay safe. She was not going to think about coffee, or light on the water, or a man who sat with silence like someone who had made peace with it. She closed her eyes. She thought about all three things until she fell asleep. Damien had found the photograph on a Tuesday morning, which was the kind of detail that stuck, because Tuesday was when he had always done his most careful work. He had hired a service 6 weeks after the accident, not the first service, which had returned only official documentation that confirmed what he already knew. Vehicle, scene, no body, presumptive status pending. He needed the second kind of service, the kind that looked past official documentation at the pattern underneath. The man he had hired was named Shaw, and Shaw worked from an office that was technically a consulting firm, and practically an information-gathering operation. Shaw did not ask why Damien wanted what he wanted. He asked only for a clear description, a timeline, a set of behavioral parameters, and access to whatever Damien could provide. Damien had provided everything. He was, as he had always been, thorough. Shaw's findings were not conclusive. He was the first to say this, in his particular way of saying things, careful, lawyered, always with the qualifier that protected him from being wrong. But his findings were suggestive, and what they suggested was this: the documentation was slightly too clean, not fake, or at least not obviously fake, but consistent in a way that real accidents, with their real inconsistencies and the real chaos of emergency response, were usually not. The scene report had a tidiness to it. The physical evidence had a tidiness to it. The kind of tidiness that came, Shaw said, from preparation. Damien had looked at Shaw for a long moment when he said this. "You think she arranged it?" he said. Shaw had made the qualified sound. "I think the evidence is consistent with that interpretation. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying the pattern fits." Damien had thanked him. He had gone home and sat in the apartment, which was still arranged in all the ways she had left it. He had not moved anything, had not changed anything, had kept the apartment as a kind of record, and he had sat at the kitchen table and thought. He was not angry, which was what surprised him most. He had expected anger. He had been bracing for it, actually, the way you brace for pain when you know it is coming. Instead, what he felt was something more like clarity, a lens coming into focus. Because if she had arranged this, if she had been planning this, in this apartment, in the quiet presence of their daily life, then she had been, for however long it took to plan, the thing he had always sensed in her, and never been able to confirm. A self underneath the self. A version of her that was not the one she showed him. He had known, he thought, in the way you know things you do not let yourself say. He had felt it in the quality of her silences, which had always been a fraction too composed. He had felt it in the way she moved through certain conversations without engagement, agreeing too easily. Not because she was a woman who agreed easily, but because she had made a calculation, and the calculation was that agreement was the most efficient path through. He had loved her for the depth of her. He understood now that the depth had always been partly hidden from him, and he was not sure, sitting at the kitchen table, whether what he felt about this was love, or its opposite, or something that was both at once, which was possibly just the definition of love, and he had never understood that until this moment. He had taken the photograph from the forum query. It was a photograph from a public event, a Marina Day somewhere north, one of those small-town events that got documented on local news sites and municipal social pages because everything got documented now. It showed a crowd on a dock. In the left side of the frame, slightly out of focus, a woman was standing alone at the edge of the water. Her back was mostly to the camera. She had cut her hair. She was wearing different clothes than anything he remembered. But the way she stood, the specific angle of her shoulders, the way her weight settled slightly to the right, the position of her head when she was looking at something she found interesting, was so precisely and recognizably hers that he had felt, looking at it, a physical sensation in his chest that he could not name cleanly. He had zoomed in. He had studied the image for 4 hours. Then he had called Shaw. Shaw had been cautious, as Shaw always was. The image was poor quality. The subject was partially obscured. Identification from a photograph of this quality would not be admissible, conclusive, or reliable. He had said all of this. Damien had said, "Where is the marina?" Shaw had told him. It was a town called Greywater Point. It was about 300 miles north of the city. The public event had been 2 months ago. Damien had started packing the same night. He did not tell anyone. This was important. He had been careful, through the months since the accident, to present himself to everyone around him, family, co-workers, the small circle of people who maintained contact with someone who has lost a partner, as a man in grief, which was accurate, and a man who was accepting the grief, which was less accurate. He had maintained this presentation carefully. He knew that if he told people he believed she was alive, that belief would be evaluated as a symptom of his grief, rather than as an investigation. And he could not afford that evaluation. He needed freedom of movement. He needed to operate without oversight. He drove north alone on a Friday. He had the address of the marina, the name of the town, and a satellite photograph of the waterfront that he had studied until he knew it the way you know places you have never been to, but have thought about long enough. He had a plan, though calling it a plan was generous. He would arrive, he would observe, he would confirm, and then he would decide what the confirmation required. He believed in deciding things in sequence. This was something he had always known about himself. He did not act from emotion, he acted from certainty, and certainty required information, and information required presence. So he drove north in the dark, through the thinning outer edge of the city, and into the flat country beyond it, and he felt, in the way he occasionally felt things underneath the surface of his careful management of himself, something that was very close to relief. She was alive. He had known it. He had known it from the beginning, in the part of himself that he trusted more than evidence, the part that had learned her over 3 years, and knew the specific shape of her in the world. She had been there, in the apartment, in the quiet of their daily life, and she had made a plan, and she had executed it, and she had done it so carefully that he had almost believed it. Almost. He drove through the night, and by early morning he was in a motel on the edge of a town whose name he did not care about, 2 hours south of Greywater Point. He slept for 4 hours. He woke up, showered, and sat at the edge of the bed and thought about what he would say when he found her. He thought about this for a long time. He did not yet know what he would say. He knew only what he felt, and what he felt was the specific intensity of someone who has been reaching toward something across a long distance and has suddenly closed the gap enough to reach it. He was close. She was close. Whatever had gone wrong between them, whatever she had needed to escape that she had not been able to name to him, had not brought to him, had not given him the chance to address, they would address it. They would speak honestly. They would find the version of their life that worked. He had always been certain he could fix things, if he was given the chance. He had always been certain, also, that she would eventually understand this about him. He got in the car. He drove north. At a gas station 30 minutes south of Greywater Point, he stopped for coffee, and stood beside his car, and looked at the road ahead of him, and felt, clearly and without ambiguity, that he was doing the right thing. He believed this completely. That was the part that made him what he was. The morning it began to unravel was a Thursday. Mara was aware of it first, as a texture rather than a fact. A quality in the air of the town that was slightly off, a frequency, a change, the way you feel weather shifting before you see it in the sky. She had learned to trust this feeling. 3 years of living inside someone else's attention had given her a sensitivity to surveillance that was almost physiological. She could feel being watched, the way some people could feel humidity. Not always accurately, not perfectly, but consistently enough to take seriously. She noticed the van first. It was parked on the street opposite her building. A dark-colored van, generic, the kind you saw everywhere, and therefore stopped noticing. She would not have noticed it either, except that it was there Tuesday morning, when she left for the marina, and it was there Tuesday evening when she returned, and it was there Wednesday, when she looked from her window before going down. On Thursday morning she looked and it was gone, and she thought, maybe she had been wrong. Maybe it was a resident. Maybe she was finding patterns in randomness, because her nervous system did not know how to stop looking for patterns. On Thursday afternoon, someone asked about her at the diner. She learned this from Pete, who had been inside the diner at the time, and had overheard the conversation at the counter. A man. Pete described him as well-dressed for this part of the world. Dark hair. Talked carefully. Had asked the woman behind the counter whether she knew a woman new to town. Dark hair. Worked at the marina. The woman behind the counter had said there were several people who matched that description, and the man had said he understood, and he had thanked her, and he had left. Pete told her this, with the careful neutrality of someone who understands the difference between delivering information and making a judgment. He said, "Thought you should know." She said, "Thank you." He went back to work. She stood on the dock and looked at the harbor and felt, in the cold air, the specific quality of the thing she had been waiting for. He was here. The thought was not a thought, it was more physical than that, a sudden absolute certainty the same way the certainty of a fall arrives before the actual impact. She stood very still and let it move through her, and then she put it in the place where she kept dangerous things, and began to think practically. She needed to go. This was the first thought. This was the ready thought. The one she had prepared since she arrived in Greywater Point, the plan behind the plan. If the thing she was afraid of happened, she would not wait to confirm it. She would go. New documents, different direction, already arranged. She had the number. She had the emergency protocol. She would activate it and be gone by tomorrow morning. She began walking back toward the equipment shed to return the tools she was carrying. She had not made it 10 feet when she saw Kane. He was standing at the far end of the dock, at the water's edge, and he was looking at her. Not in the way someone looks at you when they want something, in the way someone looks at you when they have noticed something and are waiting to see if you are going to need help before they offer it. She stopped walking. He crossed the distance between them in a few easy steps. He stood close enough to speak quietly, which was something she noticed he always calculated correctly. "Something's wrong," he said. Not a question. "Someone is asking about me in town," she said. She did not dress it up. There was no version of this that benefited from softening. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone forming a response, but the silence of someone who has already received the information and is organizing what to do with it. "Does this person have a reason to find you?" he asked. She looked at him. She thought about everything she had not told him. She thought about what she had told him and what she had not. And she thought about the specific cost of telling the truth now versus the cost of not telling it. And she thought, in the same systematic way she thought about all important things. This man has not asked me a single dangerous question in 6 weeks, and I am about to ask him to hold something he didn't agree to hold. "Yes," she said. He nodded. No follow-up, no request for elaboration. He simply filed it. "I need to go," she said. "I have arrangements. I'll be gone by tomorrow." He looked at her steadily. "Where?" "I don't know yet. I have a contact." She heard herself saying this, and heard how inadequate it was, and pressed on. "I have a protocol. It's prepared. I just need to activate it and—" "You don't need to leave," he said. She looked at him. "I have property north of town," he said. "A lot of it. Properly gated. People who work there who don't ask what goes on. Nobody comes in without my knowing about it." He said this simply, without emphasis, without the particular performance she had learned to recognize in men who wanted something from her. If you want to be somewhere safe while you figure out what comes next, that's an option. She thought of Pete's words, the kind of property you don't see the edge of. She thought of Bev's quiet deference. She thought of the way Kane Hartley stood on the dock in the early morning and never explained himself to anyone. She thought, I have already made the mistake of trusting a man without understanding what I was trusting. I am not going to make it again. She said, "What do you want in return?" He did not react to this the way she had half expected him to, with offense or a hurt performance of innocence. He said, "Nothing. You need somewhere to be. I have somewhere." He looked at her with level eyes. That's it. She stood in the cold air of the dock with the gray water behind her, and thought about the van on the street, and the man at the diner counter, and the specific certainty she had felt 20 minutes ago. She thought about her emergency protocol, and the new documents, and the new name, waiting for her somewhere she hadn't arrived at yet. She thought about a window in a small room. "Okay," she said. The word surprised her when it came out, not because she didn't mean it, but because she had not known she would say it until she did, and the fact that she had said it felt like something significant, something she was not sure she had words for yet. "We go now," he said, "not tomorrow." "Now," she agreed. He pulled out his phone and made one call, brief, saying only a few words that meant nothing to her, and apparently everything to whoever received them. Then he pocketed the phone and said, "My car is at the far end of the lot." She walked beside him across the dock. She did not look around for the dark van. She did not check the diner or the street. She kept her eyes forward and her pace even, and she thought, "I do not know this man. I do not know what his property looks like, or why people step aside for him, or what the word in Greywater Point is about who exactly the Hartley family is. I know nothing about him except that he brought me coffee without asking, and sat with silence like it was easy, and just now offered me the only thing I needed without making it complicated. That was not enough to trust someone. She knew that. She got in the car anyway. The road to Kane's property took 40 minutes and went mostly north, through a stretch of pine that thickened on either side of the road, until it was a wall of dark green on both sides, and then through a gate that she had not seen coming until the car slowed, and the gate, heavy iron, set between two stone pillars, lit from below, appeared out of the tree line like something from a different world. Kane had a card in his door pocket that he lifted and pointed, and the gate swung open without sound. She watched the gate in the mirror as it closed behind them. She thought, "There it is." The gate was not a threat. She knew enough, now, to distinguish between enclosures that kept things out and enclosures that kept things in. This one faced outward. Its weight was toward the world beyond it. She was, on the inside of it, in a place that was harder to enter than to leave, and that was the difference she had spent 3 years forgetting how to see. The house itself was not what she had expected, which was something large and deliberate, announcing itself. It was large, but it did not announce. It sat in a clearing between the trees, with the quality of something that had been there long enough to be part of the landscape rather than imposed upon it. Stone and timber, lit from within, the kind of building that said, "I was built to last, not to impress." Several vehicles were parked in the wide graveled area beside it. People moved with purpose, near a low outbuilding to the right. No one looked up when Kane's car stopped. He got out and she got out, and a woman she had not noticed until now appeared from the front entrance, not young, confident, the kind of person who managed things. "Ingrid," Kane said, "we'll need the east room." "Ready in 20 minutes, the woman said, and went. Mara stood in the cold air and looked at the house, and the trees, and the gate behind her, and the lights in the windows. "What is this place?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "My family's property," he said, "has been for a long time." "And what does that mean?" she asked. She turned to look at him. She had not done this. Turned to look at him directly, in full light, with the intention of seeing, since she had arrived at Greywater Point. She looked now. He was older than she had estimated from the dock, by a few years. The lines around his eyes were the ones that came from weather and not from worry. He looked back at her with an evenness that she was beginning to understand was just his nature, not performance, not composure, but the particular steadiness of someone who has been what he is for long enough that it has settled into him completely. "It means," he said, "that within about 60 miles in 3 directions, I know what happens. People here know me. They work for me, or they work for people I trust. It means that your man from the diner will not find this gate, and if he does," he paused, "he will not find it hospitable." She held his gaze. "You said people who work for you. How many people?" He told her. The number was not small. She thought. Pete said the kind of property you don't see the edge of. Pete was being literal. "You're not just a man who docks his boat at the marina," she said. Something moved briefly across his face, not quite a smile, but something in that neighborhood. "No," he said, "I'm not." She turned back to the house. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The apartment, the plan, the burning paper in the kitchen sink, the road above the ravine in the cold dark, the 3 months in a small room above a hardware store, the dock in the morning, and the coffee without a question, and the steady presence of a man she had told herself not to think about. She thought about all of it. "You should have told me," she said. It came out quietly. Not anger, not yet. Something more like the specific exhaustion of discovering that the world you were trying to navigate had different terrain than the map suggested. "You didn't ask," he said. "You knew I was keeping my distance deliberately," she said. "You knew I was someone who needed to be careful, and you let me be careful around you without knowing what I was being careful around." He was quiet. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." He looked at her. "I'm telling you now." She let that sit. Inside the house, through the lit windows, she could see movement. Ingrid, probably. Preparing whatever the east room was. Somewhere a door opened and closed. The pines around the clearing moved slightly in the wind, their sound a low, continuous note that underlined the quiet. She had walked into one man's world without knowing its walls. She was standing at the edge of another man's world, and this one had shown her the gate before she was all the way through it, which was something, she supposed. It was not the same. She needed it to not be the same. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask," he said. "The gate," she said. "From the inside. Is it the same?" He looked at her for a long moment. He understood the question. She could see that he understood it completely. "The code for the gate is 4271, he said. "Ingrid can give you a card tonight. You can leave whenever you want." She looked at him. "Mara," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name since that one early occasion on the dock, and it landed with a weight she was not ready for. "I am not," he stopped. He chose his next words with visible care. "I have never been the thing you are afraid of. I don't want to prove that to you because I understand why you wouldn't believe a proof. So I'll just say it and let you watch and see for yourself." She breathed in the cold air. She thought, "I have been very wrong about a man before." She thought, "I have also been very right about one." She said, 4271. 4271, he confirmed. She walked toward the house. She heard him fall into step behind her, at a distance that was exactly respectful, and she did not look back. And she thought about the code, and she thought about the gate, and she thought about the distance between an enclosure that keeps things in and an enclosure that keeps things out. She did not have the answer yet. She was not going to pretend she did. But the door to the house was open and the lights were on inside, and she walked through it and the cold stayed outside, and that was, she thought, a beginning. On the third morning, she checked the gate. She told herself she was taking a walk. The grounds were large enough that walking was a reasonable thing to do, and she had, in fact, walked in other directions on the 2 preceding mornings, through the pines to the north side, and along the edge of the property, where the tree line gave way to a low ridge with a view of the water below. She had done this genuinely, with appreciation for the view, and had returned to the house feeling something she was still being cautious about naming. But on the third morning she walked south, toward the gate, and she told herself she was taking a walk. She reached the gate at 9:40 in the morning. The stone pillars were damp from the overnight cold, the iron dark and heavy, the sort of gate that announces permanence simply by existing. She stood before it. She took out the card that Ingrid had given her on the first evening, without fanfare, as she showed her to the east room, a room with its own entrance, its own bathroom, its own key, that Ingrid had clearly arranged to give her the maximum amount of self-sufficiency within the larger house. She had done this so naturally, without explanation, that Mara had wondered how often Ingrid arranged rooms for people who needed to know that exit was possible. She held the card near the reader on the pillar. The gate swung open. She stood in the gap and looked at the road beyond it, gray and empty under the winter sky. She could see the curve of the road where it disappeared into the pines, and beyond that, conceptually, the town and the marina, and the world she had been existing in for the past several months. She could walk through the gate right now. She had the card. She had her bag in the east room. She had not unpacked it, had kept it packed, out of habit and out of the specific kind of readiness that had become part of how she moved through the world. She could walk out, find transport, activate the emergency contact, disappear again. She stood in the gap for a full minute. Then she stepped back and let the gate close. She stood there watching it close and thought about what the minute had been for. She thought about why she had needed to do this. Not to test Kane's word, exactly, because his word had been given plainly, and she had found, over 3 days, no evidence to contradict it. She had needed to test herself, to confirm that staying was a choice she was making, and not a thing that was happening to her while she stood still. It was a choice. The open gate made it a choice. She turned and walked back through the pines. On the 4th day, Kane told her about Damien. He told her quietly, in the kitchen in the morning, with the specific tone of someone delivering information they know is unwanted and are not going to soften on that account. He had heard from the town. through the network of people who, she was learning, kept him informed the way small rivers keep a lake supplied. A man had been at the marina. A man had been at 2 other establishments. The man had a photograph on his phone that he was showing to people, asking whether they recognized the woman in it. Nobody he had asked yet had recognized her as Mara, because she had been careful, and because the people in Greywater Point had a particular quality she had come to appreciate, which was that they minded their business in the specific way of people whose business sometimes required minding. But the man was still there. She sat with this. She sat with it in the way she had sat with all the hard things in the past year, which was directly and without flinching, and without rushing past to the reaction, because the reaction was always more useful when she let the reality arrive first. "He's in town," she said. "Yes. He doesn't know where I am." "Not yet," Kane said. He did not add anything to this, did not soften the "not yet," did not let her believe it was a permanent condition. She was grateful for that. "What do you want to do?" he asked. This was the question she had been turning over for 4 days, from the moment Pete had told her about the man at the diner. It was the question she had been turning over, in a larger form, for the better part of a year. "What do you want to do?" She thought about Damien in the town below the ridge, showing a photograph, patient, methodical, certain. She thought about him at the ravine in the dark, arriving before the emergency services. She thought about the story he told early in their relationship, the other woman, the drama of her departure, his frantic worry. She thought about what she now understood that story to be. She thought about the work Rena had been doing, because Rena had been doing work of her own, in the months since the disappearance, in the city, quietly and carefully, collecting the kind of evidence that did not disappear, and did not rely on Nadia being present to deliver it. Emails she had forwarded before the accident, witness accounts from 2 of the old friends who had drifted away, financial records, a year's worth of documented patterns, organized and notarized, in a form that could be submitted to the appropriate people and assessed on its own terms. It was not enough to arrest a man for being what Damien was. She knew that. The law had specific requirements, specific thresholds, and what Damien had done to her life was not always a thing the law had vocabulary for, but it was enough to make noise, enough to complicate his narrative, enough to give official ears a reason to listen. She picked up her phone. She called Rena. Rena answered on the second ring. "He's here," Mara said. A pause. "Are you safe?" Rena asked. "Yes. I need you to activate the legal package. Everything we prepared, the full set." "Now?" "Now." She paused. "He's not going to stop. We knew he wasn't going to stop. So we stop him." "Mara." Rena's voice was careful. "If we activate the package, it reopens the question of whether you are dead. You understand that?" "I know. You'd have to come forward, at some point." "I know," she said again. "It's okay." She looked out the window at the pine trees, at the gray sky above them, at the world she had been hiding from. "I'm ready." Rena was quiet for a moment. "I've been ready for 6 months," she said. "I was just waiting for you." Rena moved fast, which Mara had always known was one of her best qualities. By the time Damien reached the gate, and he did reach the gate, 2 days later, because he was what he was, and he did not stop until there was something in front of him that stopped him, the package was already in the hands of 2 separate authorities, an attorney who specialized in patterns of coercive control, and a state investigator who had been looking for exactly this kind of documented case to act on. The submission had been careful, thorough, and impossible to dismiss. Damien reached the gate on a Tuesday morning. He had a car and a certainty, and the specific expression of someone who has always been given what he came for. He stopped at the stone pillars and he reached for the intercom. Kane's security team reached for their radios first. What happened next was not violent. She had wanted it to be. In the part of herself she was honest about, but it was not. What happened next was orderly and complete. Damien was detained at the gate by people who had both the legal standing and the physical presence to detain him while the necessary communications were made, and within an hour and 40 minutes, a state vehicle arrived on the access road, and 2 people in that vehicle had a conversation with Damien that Mara was not present for. Kane had offered to let her watch from the upper floor. She had said no. She had sat in the east room with her bag still packed on the chair, and her hands in her lap, and Rena's voice on the phone, and Rena had walked her through the sequence as it happened. The arrival of the state vehicle, the conversation, the moment when Damien's certainty began to encounter something larger than itself. "He's asking for a lawyer," Rena said. "Good," Mara said. "He's claiming you're alive," Rena said. "He's saying he has proof." "He does have proof," Mara said. "That's fine." "It's fine because we have more," Rena said. She had known this. She had been counting on this for months, from the moment the plan moved from getting away to getting through. Getting away was what the accident was for. Getting through required the evidence. Kane knocked on the East Room door 2 hours later and said simply, "It's done." She had looked at him through the doorway. "He's gone?" she asked. "He's gone," he said. "He'll be back in the city by tonight, with a set of problems considerably larger than finding you." She let out a breath. Then another. She put her hands flat on her knees and breathed, and the air that came into her lungs felt different than it had in a long time, cleaner or larger, or simply unencumbered by the specific weight of waiting. She did not cry. She had thought she might, and she did not. What she felt instead was something more like exhaustion, the full accounting of everything the past year had cost, arriving all at once now that the bill was finally paid. She sat with it and let it be what it was. After a while she stood up and walked out of the East Room, and down the hallway, and out through the front door of the house, and across the graveled area to the path through the pines. And she walked through the pines to the ridge with the view of the water, and she stood there, and looked at the water in the gray February light, and thought about nothing in particular for a long time. She heard footsteps on the path behind her. She did not startle. She knew the sound of his footsteps. Kane came to stand beside her. Not close, at the distance he always maintained, which was the distance that said, "I'm here, and you have room." They looked at the water together. "I'm going to have to deal with the legal part," she said, "the being alive part." "I know," he said. "It's complicated. My name, my real name. Rena told me," he said, "after she called you last night. She wanted someone else to know." He glanced at her. "I hope that's all right." She thought about this. She thought about her name, her real name, Nadia, which she had not spoken aloud to anyone except Rena since the night of the accident. It was strange, the idea of this man carrying it. It was also, she realized, not only strange, it was something else. Something for which she was still finding the word. "It's all right," she said. He nodded. He looked back at the water. "What happens next?" he asked. She had been thinking about this, not the legal mechanics, though those were real and would require attention. Not the logistics, though those existed too. She had been thinking about what happened after the logistics, in the space that would be left when the year of surviving was finished, and something else needed to begin. She had been thinking about who she was, at the end of all of this. What had been lost and what had not, what had been compressed into storage, and what had been genuinely erased. She had been thinking about the girl in the photograph, the one looking at something outside the frame. She had been thinking about what she might be looking at, now, if the photograph were taken today. She thought she might be looking at this, at the water, and the ridge, and the pines, and the man standing beside her at a respectful distance who had told her the gate code on the first night, and had not asked her for anything since. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's fine," he said. They stood in the cold air for a while longer. The water below was very still, and very gray, and very large. The kind of large that is steadying, rather than overwhelming. The kind that puts things in proportion without diminishing them. After a while, she said her name. "Not Mara, the other one." She said it quietly, the way you say something you have been keeping for a long time, to see how it sounds in open air. She said it once, and then she was quiet, and the words sat between her and the water and the pines and the gray winter sky. Kane said nothing. He simply heard it, and let it be. She thought, this is what it feels like. She had forgotten, or had stopped believing it was available to her. The specific feeling of being heard without being held, seen without being owned, known without being catalogued. She had forgotten that this was what other people felt like, the ordinary way of being with someone who simply wanted you to be there, in no particular shape, without conditions. She stood on the ridge and felt it. Below, the water moved in its slow, cold way. The pines held their ground. The sky held its overcast gray, unhurried, wide. Behind her, the gate was closed, and the code was 4271, and she could open it whenever she chose. She was not going to open it today. Today she was going to stand here and breathe and let the year settle around her like a weight that has been carried long enough and has finally been set down, and she was going to let herself, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, simply exist. Not as Nadia, not as Mara, as herself, whoever that was, whoever she was building herself back into, piece by piece, in a town that smelled like salt and pine and cold water. She was alive. She had chosen to be alive, specifically and with effort, against the particular gravity of a man who had spent years convincing her that she was not quite entitled to it. She had been wrong to believe him. She looked at the water. She was not wrong anymore.